Wednesday, March 8th. It's not Wednesday, March 8th. Just checking. Monday the 13th. Hope you had a good weekend. This hearing of the Minnesota Senate Agriculture, Broadband, and Rural Development Committee is now in session. A quorum is present. Folks, our first order of business will be to hear from Senator Rarick, Senate File 861. Members of the public who intend to testify today, and advocates, we do have a very busy agenda today, a very packed agenda. I'm going to ask all of you, regardless of your preparation, to please keep your comments between 2 to 3 minutes. You may have prepared a half-hour lecture. I'm going to ask you to edit quickly and get us in the 2 to 3 minute territory, if you would, please, because we've got lots of stuff to talk about today. Senator Rarick, to your bill, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And do I have to stick to that 2 to 3 minutes? No, just kidding.
You only get 30 seconds, brother.
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for hearing Senate File 861. This is a bill to try to help address some of the processing issues that we're seeing around Minnesota right now. I love it every year. I go to a local guy out of the Ascove area called Schneider Meats, and typically buy a half a beef and a full pig from him every year. And every year I hear the story of how far behind he is. He can't find the people he needs, and how the farmers in the area cannot get on his schedule because he can't meet their demands. And this bill is looking to provide some grants to help people get into that industry, which could alleviate that issue. So, and with that, I will turn it over to my testifiers.
Mr. Wierschicke, if you would please unmute your microphone, turn on your camera, state your full name for the record, and start your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Greg Wierschicke. I'm from Elk River, Minnesota. I'm with Clean Chickens and Company and the Land Stewardship Project. I support this bill as a processor because it would be able to give my staff more training and more versatility and cross-training, that we could work with more staff. It also improves the livelihood of our local citizens if they have more training to work in the meat processing industry. And it's just for more meat safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wierschicke. I apologize for what I did to your last name.
That's fine.
Our next testifier is Mr. Gardner. Mr. Gardner, if you would please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, state your full name for the record, and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We're good.
Perfect. My name is Jim Gardner. I co-founded Gardner Family Farm with my wife, and we process about 2,500 chickens a year, which is pretty darn small. But we're actively pursuing state equal to inspection, and we strongly support SF 861. And bad with numbers here. There's another bill, SF 1592 as well. We would like to open our facility up to the public, process poultry for other people, and I need staff that know what they're doing. And we want a food safe product. I want, it's really hard to find people to process chickens, and if there was funding allocated to help us find these people, we would. That's why we really strongly support these two bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Our next testifier is Ms. Goldman. If you would please come to the table up here and state your full name for the record and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Chair Putnam and members of the committee, my name is Sarah Goldman, and I'm a policy organizer with the Land Stewardship Project. The Land Stewardship Project works on behalf of over 1,000 farmer members across the state, many of whom reside in greater Minnesota. Over the past 2 years, as our staff have spoken with new and beginning meat processors and small to mid-sized livestock farmers, it's become abundantly clear that there are significant challenges for small meat processors who are trying to get off the ground, update, or expand their facilities, and for many of our livestock producers who rely on these processors. Two bills before you today, SF 1592, which creates a meat processing liaison position within the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and SF 861, which establishes the meat processing training grants, provides important resources to alleviate such challenges. The new meat processing liaison position will provide needed support to processors, especially those processors just getting up and running. MDA is a subject matter expert on inspection regulation and deals with inspection questions on a day-to-day basis, so they're very well equipped to answer questions and help folks navigate the process. In addition, this position will leverage federal resources through a one-to-one funding match. This proposal also has widespread support. It was included in the governor's budget, and many organizations, including the Minnesota Farmers Union, the Minnesota Farm Bureau, Minnesota Association of Meat Processors, the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance, and the Latino Economic Development Center have all submitted letters of support for this proposal. SF 861, which provides training grants to processors, is also an important bill, as it provides resources so that processors have the skills necessary to update, expand, transfer, or transition their processing facilities. Meat and poultry processors under federal or state inspection need to have a sanitation standard operating procedures, or SSOP, and a HACCP, which is a hazard analysis and critical control point plans, or plans, in place. And developing these procedures and plans can be really difficult, and often processors have many questions. These grants would provide needed financial support so that processors have resources to develop these plans in addition to business plans. And I just wanted to mention that this proposal also has widespread support from a number of organizations, including the Minnesota Farmers Union, Minnesota Farm Bureau, Minnesota Association of Meat Processors, the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance, and the Latino Economic Development Center. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Goldman. Members, questions for the testifiers of the bill's author or comments on the bill? Seeing none, Senator Rarick, your final comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, this will help our meat processors, their workers, to get the training that they need, and our small farmers. So I hope you consider it.
Thank you, Senator Rarick. Senate File 861 will be held over for possible inclusion. Next order of business is Senate File 1592, Senator Kupec. Senator Kupec, it's my understanding that you might have an amendment that you'd like to offer on Senate File 1592. Is that accurate?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I offer the A1 amendment.
Senator Kupec offers the A1 amendment. Senator Kupec, to your amendment?
Sure. Basically, we put in the appropriation for how much it was going to put into the bill for the existing business models, and then we also wanted to just make sure it was clear that where exactly the title and was inserted for a bill for where exactly the money was going. So that's the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. Members, any discussion or commentary on the A1 amendment? Seeing none, the amendment is adopted. Oh, sorry. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The A1 amendment is adopted. Senator Kupec to Senate File 1592
sorry,
as
Mr.
amended.
Chair, I should also clarify the dollar amount change on the A1 amendment. It is actually half of the money of the original bill because there is federal money that will match this. So we have knocked down the dollar amount in half.
Thank you for that clarification, Senator Kupec.
Okay, So the Senate File 1592 is basically a money that would help from the commissioner send money to people for a certification navigator position. So the position will help support meat and poultry processors in the navigation of all of the regulations that the industry then has forward. So navigating the inspection process, making sure that they have all their licenses and such in place. So it's a way for all these, for what we've seen really since coming out of the end of the pandemic, where we've seen a lot more people who are interested in finding a local source for that, and new businesses that want to start up. It would be a way to help them navigate that, the regulations that the Agriculture Department has. I have a couple of testifiers too.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. Mr. Worski, if you're still here, if you would please unmute your microphone, turn on your camera, state your name again for the record, if you would please, and commence your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Greg Werschke from Elk River, Minnesota. When I started my business, Clean Chickens and Company, we went to a mobile USDA poultry processing unit, which is the only one in the country. But my issue was trying to get my HACCP certification. Was I went through every source I could find in Minnesota, and I eventually had to go to Wisconsin and ask them for help to get my HACCP plan put together. We need someone in the state to help with new processors and existing processors with language barriers, because some of our meat problem or bottlenecks that we have could be solved if we could work with the language barriers and help those specific meat processors. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Worski. Mr. Gardner, if you would please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, state your full name for the record again, and commence your testimony when you're ready, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Jim Gardner. I can speak a lot more about my support of SF 1592 because we're just starting up. We process poultry under Minnesota's poultry exemption, but in order to become inspected, there's a lot of facility requirements that it's written down in the law, but that interpretation of the law can change depending on who you call, whether it be the MDA or USDA. It's really hard to get a hold of someone, and the MDA staff is very understandably busy and full. We really need someone, a point of contact person of, hey, I'm about to pour some concrete or whatever else I'm doing. I need to know straight up answers before I spend thousands of dollars of basically my life savings into this dream that we have to process clean food for other people. And if I make a mistake and I have to rip up concrete or tear out wiring because I missed a step, that could mean the difference between us succeeding or failing as a business, because we want to follow the law, but right now the law is hard to follow because it's complicated. Understandably so. You can't just make meat regulation and food safety in a couple paragraphs. So we really need a full-time person to be our point of contact, and that would make the world of difference for very small startups like ourselves, who we can't afford to make mistakes and undo our work. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Now our next testifier is in person again. Ms. Goldman, if you would please come back to the table, state your full name for the record, and commence your testimony when you're ready, please.
Hi, my name is Sarah Goldman. I'm a policy organizer with the Land Stewardship Project. I think my previous testimony will suffice for support for this bill as well, so thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Goldman. We still have two more testifiers on this specific bill before we commence discussion, and that would be actually just one. Commissioner Peterson, if you would please state your full name for the record and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman and members, Tom Peterson, Commissioner of Minnesota Department of Agriculture. We just appreciate the opportunity to be on the record supporting this bill. It is in the governor's budget, and, you know, we put it in there. Again, we had a portal to take ideas from the public. This was a top idea. The department, we don't have a dedicated staff person that works on this, and we see this as a really big need. In COVID, we saw a lot of people interested getting into this, and we continue to have, you know, I probably personally field a call a week from somebody who wants to set up shop meat processing, you know, and then what do those dreams lead to when you try to look at all the different things that you gotta do. So we pull staff from other places to work with people that are trying to work on this, and I think that I'd also say in 2020, we had a lot of grants for CARES dollars and pieces like that, but we have to get more people up and running into this. So I think that we couldn't get all our grants out to expand and build the ones we had, you know, and so having new people come in, to me, would be helpful. I'd also say I see growth in other areas, whether it's Hmong. We've seen different people in Hmong and Latino, people wanting to get into this business and owning their own places, which is really important, and there's some barriers there that the department could use a person to help with that. And also the Amish. We see a lot of Amish getting into this, which I think is really interesting, and it's different. You know, it takes some time to do this. So just appreciate the opportunity to voice our support for this legislation.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Looks like we do have one more testifier after all. Mr. Sobocinski. Is that accurate?
Okay.
If you could just please state your full name for the record and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Don Arnosti. I'm a partner with Paul Sobocinski in this project, and I'm here to deliver his remarks. Paul is caught in a blizzard in western Minnesota trying to deliver his pigs to the Nyman Ranch collection point, and didn't think he was going to be able to get an internet connection. So my name is Don Arnosti, and I am part of the so-called bottleneck project that is our fiscal sponsor is the Minnesota Farmers Union. Paul is a livestock farmer who for 25 plus years has raised cattle and hogs that he sells to the market through Nyman Ranch, and also direct marketing through local lockers. This bill, Senate File 1592, is really important for a lot of the reasons that people have spoken about. The item that I will add to what has been stated, it's a different meat shop calling me. I've got 3 pigs at a different meat shop. The item that I'll add to what people have stated here is that the bottleneck project did interviews with the small local meat processing industry last year. We interviewed more than 50 members of the industry, several of which are in the room today right now. And through that came a number of recommendations. You can find the report on the Minnesota Institute of Sustainable Agriculture at the University of Minnesota's website. But one of the recommendations was that MDA get this navigator position for all the reasons that you've heard articulated there. There's a host of other recommendations there. A number of bills that you're hearing both today and elsewhere have actually derived from that, talking to the industry, talking to the small meat processors. And we did that in an organized manner, and the report is available for your review. Thank you very much for offering this bill, Senator. And we urge the committee to fully fund the position at the Department of Ag. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, sir. That concludes testimony on Senate File 1592. Members, questions for the testifiers, the bill's author, or comments on the bill as a whole? Seeing none, Senator Kupec, your closing statements.
No, thanks. I think testifiers definitely backed up the need for this position, and it also helps that we will be tapping into some federal funds for this as well.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. Senate File 1592, as amended, will be held over for possible conclusion. Senator Kupec, again, if you would, please, Senate File 2620.
Sure, and Mr. Chair, I have the A1 amendment to Senate File 2620.
Senator Kupec offers the A1 amendment. Senator Kupec, to your amendment.
Sure. It was pointed out by counsel that it was not exactly perfectly clear where any leftover funds, if there were any from this program, were to go. And so the A1 amendment just makes it clear that it is supposed to stay within the Agri program and not be schlepped off to the general fund somewhere else to be used where we don't want it to go.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. Members, discussion of the A1 amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The A1 amendment is adopted. Senator Kupec, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill here would add an additional $3 million to the Agri Value Added Program for meat and poultry processing. This is MDA's flagship grant program. Of course, we are all very familiar with Agri to support meat and poultry processors as they work to start new plants and modernize equipment. Broadly, this committee cares a lot about investing local and regional meat processing plants for a few important reasons. First of all, as we mentioned before, after COVID-19, consumers are looking for those other places, those outlets, and getting rid of that bottleneck too in the meatpacking industry. The four largest meat packers control 54% of poultry processing, 66% of pork packing, and 85% of beef packing. 98% of those beef cattle are processed at just 50 plants across the U.S. We can shorten supply chains, build resiliency, and create good paying jobs by supporting our local processors. Farmers also experiencing a severe shortage of processing, and it's limiting their farm business. And new farmers, particularly, this is a great way for livestock, is a good entryway into farming, but only if you can get that processed. With farms, many processors are reaching, as with farms, I should say, many processors are reaching retirement age, and a big barrier to them is transitioning their plants and shops to the next generation and upgrading their equipment. So if we can help ensure that plants are up to date, we can help them with transition. Agri value added grants are issued at a competitive basis and require a 50% match up to $50,000. Above $50,000, the grantee is responsible for a 75% match with a maximum award of $150,000. Individuals, businesses, cooperatives, and others can apply to invest in equipment and physical improvements that support processing capacity and market diversification and market access. A few other examples here. I have some from Senator Westrum's district and Senator Anderson's district. They're not here. But they were granted some of those things. And also two Hmong-owned processors also received grants in South St. Paul. So it is certainly a benefit that has gone across the state and is widely spread about. So I have a couple of other testifiers here too who would like to come forward.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. And thank you for reminding me of this as well. Before we move on, I'm going to take a moment to tell Senator Westrum, if he's watching at home, that we're thinking about him, and we hope he gets better fast.
We are.
We're thinking about you, dude. So now our testifiers, Mr. Schmidt, if you would please. Mr. Schmidt, would you come to the table? State your full name for the record and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Putnam and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Ryan Schmidt, and I am the third-generation owner of Schmidt's Meat Market in Nicollet, Minnesota. We are a small custom meat processor located in south-central Minnesota, and we process livestock for local farmers. I am here to share my support for the Agri Value Added Program for Meat and Poultry Processing, Bill SF 2620. There used to be many meat processors in every small town and community in Minnesota. They played an important role in the community and were a vital resource for the local and regional farmers to be able to take or sell their livestock for processing and keep it at a local level. Today, there is a bottleneck because there are few small towns and communities that have meat processing plants, excuse me, in which local livestock producers can market and sell their animals for what is usually a premium versus what they would get from selling to large meat packers. My business has utilized the Agri-Value-Added Cost Sharing Grant Program in previous years to help with facility modifications and upgrades, as well as equipment purchases. These grant dollars allowed us to enhance food safety and increase efficiencies so that we could increase custom meat processing for our local farmers, allowing them access to more diversified livestock markets. It is fair to say that without grant monies, we would not have moved forward with some of those high-cost past projects. Our industry is under many challenges these days. There is a severe lack of interest in our industry from a career perspective since meat cutting and processing programs were cut from trade school curriculums 2 decades ago. Our primary and secondary schools do not have classrooms and labs that expose the next generation to the opportunities and career paths available within our industry. Due to these labor challenges, it is becoming necessary to invest in costly equipment that can help improve efficiencies to offset these labor shortages. There is also significant financial barriers to start, expand, or enhance small meat processing facilities. Regulations around costly facility design, along with the high cost of approved materials and the high cost of equipment, are significant barriers to expand and upgrade our facilities. Therefore, grant programs such as this can have a significant and meaningful impact on furthering the expansion as well as the existence of meat processing businesses. Thank you, and I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Our next testifier is Mr. Vanderpool. If you would please come to the desk, state your full name for the record, and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Putnam and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Josh Vanderpool, and I'm from Clare City, Minnesota. Just north of Clare City, we farm and raise about 800 hogs, about 40 head of beef cattle, and have about 200 layer chickens, all of which we market direct to consumers and through 17 different stores some of which we sell frozen to, and some of which we sell fresh meats to. As a mid-sized livestock farm supporting 3 generations, we rely on meat processors who are able to be able to bring our livestock to market. So I'm excited to tell you a bit about what an additional investment in the Agri-Value-Added program would mean to livestock producers such as ourselves. First, as a farmer and a Farmers Union Executive Committee member, we hear a lot from farmers who are facing a shortage of livestock processing. Some have to wait for years to get a slot to get their livestock processed, and others have to travel long distances. And I'd like to add that that's something it's not a new problem. It's been going on for a while for farms like ours. Our farm utilizes currently, we're utilizing 3 different processing facilities just to be able to get the amount of work done that we need to do. We have at times used 4. Second, plants upgrading their facilities makes a big difference to our farm, not only as it relates to the volume they're able to process, but a couple things I can think of during the harvest period, having the proper equipment and everything. Really makes a difference in the quality of the product that we'll be able to sell later. The other thing is packaging. Having good quality packaging helps with our shelf life on the fresh side, and being some of it's going to retail facilities where customers are picking it out. That's an important thing too. Finally, much like farms, many processors are reaching the time for generational transition. Ensuring that plant infrastructure is up to date is important to transitioning this business into the next generation. We are in the process of transitioning our farm, and having regional processors is essential to the long-term success of our business. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderpool. Members, questions for the bill's author or testifiers or comments on the bill? I move the A2 amendment. Members, what this amendment does is I'll just read it to you. It just adds a sentence that it says, the commissioner must give priority to awarding grants to halal meat processors and meat processors outside the 7-county metropolitan area. We all know the difficulties faced by folks who are starting to get into the halal meat industry. We also know its tremendous economic potential and moral necessity. But we also know how important it is to make sure these resources get outside the 7-county metropolitan area. And that is why I offer this bill, this amendment to the bill. Members' discussion? All in favor of these? Senator Kupec?
I will take
For the
it.
record, that was a vertical thumb.
That was a vertical 2 thumbs up for the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The amendment is adopted. Members, any other discussion of Senate File 2620 as amended? Senator Kupec, closing statement.
Oh, just want to thank Senator Dames and Senator Dornick and you, Mr. Chair, for also being co-authors on this bill.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. Yeah, I think so. Senator Rasmusson, if you wouldn't mind, I know you were, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, I was Senate File 2620 as amended has been laid over for possible inclusion. Senator Rasmusson, if you wouldn't mind hopping ahead on the order of the menu today. Senator Kunesh is not with us quite yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to proceed whenever the committee is ready.
Senator Rasmusson will be presenting Senate File 1867 for us. Senator Rasmusson, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about this bill today. In Minnesota, it is against the law to sell dairy products too cheaply. Whether it's a gallon of milk, cottage cheese, or yogurt, you can get in trouble with the state for selling dairy products too cheaply. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture can take action against retailers and processors for selling milk below a price set in Minnesota law. This law hurts Minnesota consumers, Minnesota dairy farmers, and is not a good use of resources for the Department of Agriculture. House File 1867, the bill before the committee, would repeal Minnesota's price-setting law for dairy products. First, repealing this law will benefit consumers who are facing inflation at the grocery store by lowering the dairy prices that they pay when they check out. Grocery stores commonly employ loss leaders, which is simply a product that's sold below cost, to attract customers. In states that don't have a minimum price on dairy, milk and other dairy products are very common loss leaders in grocery stores. In Minnesota's grocery stores, soft drinks and potato chips can be common loss leaders. Around Thanksgiving, whole turkeys are also typical loss leaders to attract customers into the store. And grocery stores make up the cost difference by selling other products that consumers buy when in the store. In Minnesota, soft drinks and potato chips can be a loss leader, but it is against the law for dairy products to be sold below cost at the retail level. Coupons and other promotions cannot be used for dairy products if it puts the price below the minimum price set in law. For example, buy one, get one pints of ice cream or cottage cheese would be against the law. The Federal Trade Commission and economists have said that minimum price laws, like Minnesota's, hurt consumers by setting an artificial price floor for dairy products, leading to consumers paying more than they otherwise would. It is tough to say how much this law impacts the price of milk or other dairy products, but we do know that repealing this law will mean cheaper prices for consumers. To give you a sense, the USDA tracks retail milk prices across key U.S. markets. For 2023, Minnesota's largest market retail prices for a gallon of milk are about $1 per gallon higher than the national average. So that'd be about $5.36 for a 2% conventional milk versus $4.36 for the U.S. average for those major markets. Another major benefit of repealing this law is that it will benefit Minnesota dairy farmers. By setting an artificial floor on retail dairy prices, we suppress demand for Minnesota dairy, which hurts the amount of dairy sold and negatively impacts prices to Minnesota dairy farmers. Minnesota dairy farmers benefit when milk and other dairy products are sold at the most competitive price possible at the grocery store. The current law actually tells us that it hurts farmers by creating an exemption for June, which is National Dairy Month. This law is only in effect 11 months out of the year because otherwise dairy promotions would be illegal during Dairy Month. And Mr. Chair, members, if we repeal this law, every month can be dairy month here in Minnesota. The last reason to repeal this law is because it has also become unenforceable. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture hasn't had a complaint since 2020 and has had only 5 complaints in the last 5 years. Vertically integrated dairy producers, ever-changing prices, and complex pricing schemes make it challenging to calculate the basic cost of milk. In addition, retailers can simply claim that they are matching a competitor's price to be exempt from this law. We shouldn't have laws on the books that we can't enforce, especially when that law hurts Minnesota consumers and dairy farmers. And so with that, Mr. Chair, we'd be happy to turn to questions or testifiers.
Thank you, Senator Rasmusson. Our first testifier is Ms. Caravo, who's online. If you would please, Ms. Caravo, state your full name for the record. Turn on your camera and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Okay. My name is Jennifer Caravio. I am Vice President of the Minnesota Cottage Food Producers Association and a cottage food producer here from Mankato, Minnesota. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate File 1867, which will remove the below-cost prohibition statute for milk and some milk products. As a cottage food producer, our business profit is dependent on the price of the goods that are required to produce our cottage food products. In today's world, the cost of these goods erodes the profitability of both Tier 1 and Tier 2 cottage food producers and further restricts the ability of a cottage food producer to earn a livable wage. One could argue that inflation and the restrictive revenue cap that burdens cottage foods in Minnesota has walked back the intention of lawmakers in 2021, cottage food business owners being afforded the right to earn a livable wage and maybe even have enough to put money away for their dream of commercial space. While we recognize that cottage food producers are not alone, we feel the need to express that we have experienced a significant cost in goods we purchase to make the products that we sell. We have also seen the size, amount, and the amount of the goods shrink, so we pay more and get less, and for the packages that remain the same size, it reflects in the cost. Senate File 1867 will repeal the pricing law on milk and some milk products, which will be good for both cottage food producers and consumers. I do believe that when lawmakers passed the below-cost prohibition statute, they had the best of intentions. Unfortunately, even the best of intentions can create barriers for many while protecting the rights of special interests. This is not good for Minnesota. Minnesota Cottage Food Producers Association encourages the committee to support this bill, which will help businesses such as the cottage food industry and ultimately every Minnesota family. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Caravo. Our next testifier is Mr. McBath. If you would please come to the desk, state your full name for the record, and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Good afternoon, committee members. Darren McBeth, representing the Minnesota Milk Producers Association. It is a phenomenon that in Minnesota and nationally, June is Dairy Month. You will always see dairy organizations of all kinds promoting all things dairy in June: farms, cows, people, food products. What you also see are advertisements from grocery stores and dairy foods processors promoting deals and discounts on ice cream, cheese, yogurt, cottage cheese, milk drinks. Yet, yes, the discounts and promotions on Dairy Month, the discounts and promotions on dairy products are a marketing ploy in conjunction with Dairy Month, but in Minnesota, as you've heard at least, stores cannot offer the same discounts on dairy products outside of the month of June. And that's what this bill would address. It would repeal the so-called sales below cost prohibition on dairy products that right now, as of now, is only allowed in the month of June. So when Senator Rasmusson talked about this bill with the Minnesota Milk Producers Association, they saw it as an opportunity to, as he said, have Dairy Month every month. This would allow stores to hold dairy foods promotions year-round, whereas under current law, they can only offer those discounts in June. Minnesota Milk has talked with several dairy economists about this, and we are told the bill could help sell more milk and should have negligible impacts on dairy farmers with today's current and very complex federal milk marketing order rules primarily dictating the price that dairy farmers receive. Minnesota Milk would like to note that if the federal orders that dictate milk pricing do change, which would happen at the federal level, there should be opportunities to revisit this whole very complex area in the future. But following the economics, it would make sense to line up milk with the many other beverages against which it competes, allowing retailers to be more flexible when they want to offer sales and discounts. Thank you on behalf of the Minnesota milk producers.
Thank you, Mr. McBath. Now, Mr. Vanderpool, if you would please come back to the table. State your full name for the record again, if you wouldn't mind, and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Putnam and members of the committee. Again, for the record, my name is Josh Vanderpool, and I serve on the Executive Committee for Minnesota Farmers Union. I want to start by thanking Senator Rasmusson for taking time on Friday to meet with our organization and discuss his proposal with us. And I know the proposal is coming from a sincere belief that this will help dairy farmers and consumers, and we share those goals. That said, and based on the feedback from our board, I want to share our opposition to Senate File 1867 and removing Minnesota's prohibition on dairy loss leaders this session. This is a topic that deserves more discussion, and we'll welcome the opportunity to continue to carefully consider this over the interim. In the conversation with our board, a couple of points stood out. First, we feel that a race to the lowest price in the long term would result in lower prices paid to farmers. While we understand there's an economic argument about the potential of a lower price to bolster demand, the dairy farmers in our membership don't see that marginal price difference changing consumer behavior. Second, we feel that eliminating the prohibition and allowing retailers to price below the cost of production won't respect the work that farmers do. And that would make it harder for independent farmers to fairly price their products. I just want to say, I'm not a dairy farmer, but one of the products we do sell is eggs. That's commonly sold below cost in the grocery store, and that presents some challenges when we go to price our eggs to our customers. Many times we run into customers that believe eggs should be cheaper, and when we run into a situation like we have now where there's a shortage of supply and the price has gone up, it's become where they think we're overcharging them. Third, after the call, a couple of our board members went to their rural grocers and talked about this law. While not all of them were familiar, none of the rural grocers we spoke with anticipating being able to price milk as a loss leader. Their margins are too thin. In closing, we feel that more discussion is needed about this topic, and we'd welcome a broader conversation about fair pricing that protects independent retailers more generally. Again, thank you, Senator Rasmusson, for the conversation and for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderpool. Mr. Poole? Miss Poole? Sorry, twice.
It's all right, it happens.
If you would please state your full name for the record and for me, apparently, and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Chair Putnam, committee members, good afternoon. I'm Jamie Poole, president of the Minnesota Grocers Association, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of today's discussion on Senate File 1867. Minnesota has a unique culture of hundreds of grocers and convenience stores, many of whom are independent, multi-generationally, locally owned. The MJ is their state trade association. We have over 300 members in 13 locations statewide, as well as food producers, manufacturers, brokers, and wholesale members. Our industry employs 1 in 20 jobs in the state, both union and non-union positions. First of all, I'd like to thank Senator Rasmusson for bringing this conversation forward and his willingness to talk through the concerns and issues with our members. The law prohibiting the below sale cost of dairy products has a long history and has not been evaluated in decades. This is a law that has historically been supported from farm to fork. As an industry that's been serving our communities since the beginning of the pandemic and continues to navigate historic changes and challenges in workforce shortages, supply chain disruptions, inflation, and rising cost of inputs, this continues to be an extremely turbulent time. Uncertainty is palpable. While the law may have its shortcomings, what we are hearing from our mainstream grocers and convenience store operators is that it does make an important difference. The idea that someone could be breaking the law if they sell their dairy products below a fair cost ensures a fair and reputable marketplace. The potential for disruptions and supply challenges is real. We would respectfully ask this conversation be carried into next session's policy session. We have just begun the dialogue throughout the supply chain to discuss the repeal of this law and its potential unintended consequences. Providing safe and affordable food to our communities is the most important role that we play, and it is important that Minnesota laws support this. We believe this is a very valuable conversation, and it should involve all stakeholders with a deliberate evaluation of potential impacts. I'd like to thank again Chair Putnam, Senator Rasmusson, and the committee members for allowing us to share our industry's thoughts, and we look forward to working on this bill, and obviously we'd be happy to stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Poole. Members?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rasmussen?
I think MDA also wanted to provide some comments on the bill.
Commissioner Peterson, if you would, please, state your full name for the record again, obviously, and then commence your testimony, if you would, please.
Tom Peterson, Commissioner, Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I also have Dr. Neeser, who oversees this division, along with me, and she's worked on oversees the issue. The department, we have been supportive of this. In looking at this over the years, I've worked on this personally, going back over 20 years here at the legislature. We used to have some really big knockdown dragouts about this back in the day, but it's been probably 15 years since we've really looked at this. And so I am sympathetic to the grocers and, idea of, do we have to do that this year? I understand with inflation and the thought of that, but really understanding the impact on the grocers and piece, that is something that we could, work on, and we'd commit to that and looking at next year. I'd say though, in the time that we've been doing this and really thought about this a lot as commissioner, in the last 10 years, we've lost about half of our dairy farms in the state for a multitude of a lot of different reasons, and you're going to hear bills about that on Wednesday. But, we dropped below 2,000 dairy farms just this last last couple of months, and so something we take really seriously. Our state is awash in milk right now. And, as we look at, what are the things that are working or not working, we got to do something, and so we got to make some changes to look at what's going on. And a lot of this has to do with very large farms compared to very small farms. But, is this, serving the intended purpose? The other big thing that's changed a lot since this went into law is that we have a lot of, I hate to call them milks, but that's what you probably all know them as, whether it's oat or coconut or whatever. I have a hard time calling it milk, but that's what I'm going to call it, because it's just a cut to the chase that you understand. And I just like Ms. Neeser to just reaffirm a couple of points about the enforcement and how many cases we've had on that, because I think it would be helpful with the committee.
Ms. Neeser, if you would, please state your full name for the record, commence your testimony when you're prepared.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Dr. Nicole Neeser. I'm the Director of the Dairy and Meat Inspection Division at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And this enforcement of dairy trade practices falls under our dairy inspection program, although it is basically the only non-food safety thing that we're responsible for. So it's a little bit outside of our purview of the other food safety laws that we enforce. Just to give you a little bit of an idea about how enforcement works with this law, right now, actually in the 1980s and 90s, actually the department had actual full-time staff devoted to going out to grocery stores and making sure that grocers were selling milk at above their basic cost. However, since the 2000s, we've essentially switched to a on complaint basis only for enforcement. And so we will respond if we receive information that a retailer or someone thinks a retailer is selling at below cost. Since 2018, we've had 5 cases that we worked. 1 in 2018, 2 in 2019, 2 in 2020, 0 in 2021, and 2022, and 0 so far this year. Of those 5, most of those came from our dairy inspectors out and about on their grocery visits, noticing that they think that there's milk being sold at a fairly low price, and then the others came from competitors or retailers who thought their competitor was selling at milk below cost. The law provides a provision that allows retailers to sell their milk at a lower cost based on their competitors so they can match a competitor's price. And so typically what happens is someone complains, we investigate, and that retailer says, well, I'm just selling it at below cost because, you know, the neighboring store is selling it at below cost. And then we go to the neighboring store to check theirs, and they're like, well, I'm selling it at below cost because the other neighboring store is. And so it becomes somewhat of a circular enforcement where we can't usually sort of put one retailer at fault. The enforcement that we use is typically a warning letter. That is usually our first line of enforcement. If we were to do repetitive violations, we could do fines, but we haven't, not since the early 2000s have we gotten past a warning letter situation. So, and we also do coupon evaluations to make sure that if someone is offering a coupon, with the exception of in the month of June, that coupon is paid for to make that cost of the price of that product whole. So, for example, if a dairy manufacturer wants to offer, a gallon of milk with cereal, and that cereal manufacturer offers to pay for the gallon of milk or the coupon, the gallon of milk, they can do that. We evaluate those coupons. In 2018, we had 42 of those that we evaluated. In 2022, we had 5. So we've significantly dropped as well. We don't receive other complaints from customers because most people aren't going to complain because their milk is too low. So, so typically it's our own staff or competitors.
Thank you, Dr. Niesler. Members, any questions for our testifiers or comments about the bill? Seeing none. Senator Rasmusson, your closing comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate all the testifiers and stakeholders and for the conversation on this important bill. And I would just say, Mr. Chair and members, I think we should do the bill this year, and here's why. Consumers need help. We're hearing about inflation every day, especially the price of groceries, and a lot of the folks that I represent, when the price of their grocery bill goes up, they have to put something back on the shelf. And when we're looking at a $1 per gallon differential between what a gallon of conventional 2% milk is in Minnesota's major market compared to others, that's something we have to take into serious consideration. This bill is about making milk and cheaper milk and dairy products legal in Minnesota. You can walk into a grocery store today and buy one, get one Diet Coke, but you can't do that for yogurt. It's against the law in Minnesota unless you're in June. I think this bill will help Minnesota consumers who are feeling the impacts of inflation be able to afford nutritious dairy products for their families that is produced right here in Minnesota. This bill is also about helping dairy farmers, and I think, as you heard from the commissioner, our dairy economy is going through challenging times, and we need to do everything we can to promote Minnesota dairy products. And as you heard from Minnesota Dairy here today, from their conversations with economists, this is something that will help promote Minnesota dairy products to Minnesotans, especially with other alternative products that try to market themselves as milk. And then lastly, I think another reason to do it this year is we heard, I think, pretty clearly from the Department of Agriculture that this is not something that they view as a core mission of theirs. They've got more important work to do. And Mr. Chair, as you're developing a budget and priorities for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and working with the other body and the governor, I don't think this is important work that they're doing today, where they basically are, would have to reach out to retailers and tell them to increase the price of dairy products to Minnesota consumers. And so I very much appreciate the conversation today, and thank you for the hearing, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rasmusson. Senate File 1867 will be held over for possible inclusion. Now we're going to head back to Senator Kunesh, if we could, please, with Senate File 2681, Commissioner of Agriculture Appropriation for Grants to Partner Organizations to assist meat and poultry processors with hiring and training new employees. Senator Kunesh, when you're ready.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Putnam. I'd like to start by offering the A1 amendment.
Senator Kunesh offers the A1 amendment. Senator Kunesh, to your amendment.
Sure. This amendment reflects recommendations from MDA and an appropriation of $500,000 per year over the biennium. It also clarifies the definition of a small processor defines new employee, and confirms that MDA can take their typical admin cost of 6.5%.
Thank you, Senator Kunesh. Members, any discussion of the A1 amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment is adopted. Senator Kunesh to Senate File 2681 as amended, please.
Thank you again. I'm glad to present Senate File 2681, which builds on the legislators' work to strengthen our state's local and regional meat processing system in the wake of COVID-19. I appreciate that we're able to hear these meat processing proposals together as the committee considers how to support an industry that is really so important to farmers. My bill aims to take the next step in rebuilding our meat processing workforce, a central challenge for small and regional processing plants. When the big consolidated packing plants closed during the height of COVID-19 because workers were getting sick, the only flex in the system was the local and regional lockers. And while livestock was backing up, MDA and volunteers with the University of Minnesota and others went and talked with these small businesses about what it would be like to expand and serve more farmers. The single most limiting factor to expansion was lack of skilled workforce. In response to this, the legislature and federal government helped start technical training programs for meat cutting and butchery at Central Lakes and Ridgewater Colleges and Staples in Wilmer. My bill seeks to build on the efforts by offering funding for scholarships, relocation assistance, child care stipends, and other expenses that will help new employees access the technical training programs and get started in this industry. What we know from the colleges is that people are excited about these careers, but finding ways to get started can be a challenge, and this program would address that. The grants would be administered through nonprofits and regional development organizations who are already engaged in this work. Importantly, under the program, they would have funding to work directly with new employees, providing translation services, matching with employers, and otherwise ensuring that new employees have what they need to get started in these roles. No individual could receive more than $10,000 under my proposal, and employees at no processor could receive more than $50,000. The proposal is modeled after one brought forward by the governor last session, and it reflects recommendations in the meat processing bottleneck report from the Extension and MFU. I appreciate your consideration, and then if it's all right with you, Mr. Chair, I would like to turn to my testifiers.
Thank you, Senator Kunesh. Our first testifier is Ms. Toms, if you would please. Could you turn on your microphone, turn on your camera, state your full name for the record, and commence your testimony when you're ready, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chair and Committee, for having me today. I am Sophia Thomas, the meat cutting instructor at Ridgewater College, and I'm testifying for the Senate File 2681 bill today, as the bill would be important to implement in any continuing education programs such as Bridgewater's. As Bridgewater's program is structured, it has the student who is of an employee of an existing or wants to be a new employee of a processor, and where their lecture is all online, and they have their hands-on training as an apprenticeship or internship type style at their local processor. For them continuing their education, wanting to change their careers into meat processing is super important, but a lot of them are, like Senator said, there's a lot of interest. They're hesitant for the cost of it and what they would get out of it for paying for their education when they shouldn't have to question. For continuing education for these new employees, it provides them skills in their local processor, provides jobs for them to go back to their local processor, as well as making them have a proper way to educate their consumer as well. And many of my students, for example, they want to end up taking over a facility, or they're always asking to buy a facility. And so providing this education to students or to people who want to get into this industry, who want to take over, is really important, as many facilities, like you've mentioned in this session before, don't have successors. And so this is a way also for people who are interested, who want to take over a facility, to mentor with that current owner, so it can have a easy and successful transition. Thank you for your time today and for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Our next testifier is Ms. Fulton. If you would, please, come up to the desk, state your full name for the record, and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. Thank you for having me today. My name is Lindsay Fulton Loken. I own Blondie's Butcher Shop in Winnemingo, just south of here. I am a small custom exempt meat processor, here to touch on the bill that we're discussing here about grants. As we all know, employees are the biggest expense to any small business. Since 2020, processors have really taken a major hit as far as employees, and not just employees, but quality employees. We don't have a lot of training advantages in this state. Not many states do either. So we're a one-stop shop when it comes to employees. We're training them in ourselves, and I think we all know nothing in this world is free. So any form of grant assistance would be great, not only to retain employees, to move employees to our areas. It would also help with food safety courses, HACCP training plans, to ensure we're giving the best quality back to our customers as possible and making it a safe product. This would also alleviate an investment of a lost employee that maybe make a lateral move to another meat locker or maybe leaves the industry as a whole. I won't be a broken record in this scenario. I know you've heard it all. Thank you so much for your time today, and any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Fulton. Our next testifiers are both online. Ms. Hills, if you would, please, turn on your microphone, and turn on your camera, state your full name for the record, and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Mr. Chair, hello. My name is Cheryl Hills. I am the Director of Region 5 Development Commission, serving from central Minnesota. I've been in this role for about 17 years as an economic development district and a regional development commission. I'm supporting SF 2681. I wanted the committee members to know that there are organizations out here that would be very willing to participate in this program alongside the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. The regional development commissions like mine have a long-term relationship in the agricultural economy and have a lot of experience in working with the growers. So for instance, our food hub that we established, we have over 140 low-income growers, BIPOC, Amish, Latinx, and a whole population of folks that have talked about this need and wanting some of the issues to be resolved that your other folks that have testified have brought forward. And my role here today was just to let you know that, we deliver a lot of programs through MDA, and we're no strangers to doing the reporting that's necessary and standing beside our processors to offer additional trainings that they might not be able to do in-house while they're running their businesses. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to visit with you today and let you know that you have partners out here in rural Minnesota standing by if this is passed, ready to implement, okay?
Thank you, Ms. Hills. Our next testifier should be Mr. Sobosinski. So, Mr. Sobosinski, if you could please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and tell us how you're doing. We heard that you're in a blizzard. You okay?
I'm just fine. I am Paul Sobosinski. I'm a livestock farmer from Obasa, Minnesota. The blizzard really was yesterday, but out in the country here, our roads were all blowed in. So before I could move my livestock to a collection point at Vesta, Minnesota, we had to open the roads up with a snow blower, had to get my wife into town for work, that type of thing. And then also the collection point had to be blown out. So that's why I ran tight today. That's why Don Arnosti stepped in for me on the earlier testimony. So appreciate this opportunity to testify. I've been raising cattle and hogs on my farm for 25 years plus. I currently raise hogs for Nyman Ranch, and I also direct market hogs and cattle through local lockers. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of 2681 by Senator Kunesh. I think it's very important. COVID put a lot of pressure on small lockers due to shutdown of large processing plants. Many independent livestock farmers lost their processing slots due to larger operations taking those slots. Because local lockers are so vital to our remaining independent livestock farmers who have developed specialized markets that can provide significant higher return than commodity markets, I and several partners started a special project this past year entitled Solving the Meat Processing Bottleneck. I believe this report has been distributed to the committee. It's an executive summary of our work. And this was done to address the bottleneck in meat processing. Minnesota Farmers Union is the fiscal sponsor of our project. Our work was supported by the Regional Sustainable Development Partnership of the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and a number of key partners that include the Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota, Minnesota Association of Meat Processors, Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, Latino Economic Development Center, Sustainable Ag and Research Education Program in the United States Department of Agriculture, SARE. Like I said in your packet, I have a summary of that's been provided to you. This bill provides for grants for meat processing training and retention incentives, and specifically under Subdivision 2, grants through MDA to partner organizations to assess small and medium-sized meat and poultry processing with hiring and training new employees. This provides for navigation service to entities listed under the definition section of the bill. This bill is important because it benefits independent livestock producers by maintaining access to meat processing services, benefits local communities where these businesses are located, benefits consumers seeking local sources of meat from producers meeting their environmental, religious, and social values. Our report entitled Solving the Meat Processing Workforce Bottleneck specifically speaks on page 4 of our summary that state financial resources should be made to navigate organizations such as LDC and others that consist immigrant apprentices with culturally sensitive business management training. This is in addition to the legislature providing support for a navigator position at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, which we wholly support. This bill provides for tuition assistance, relocation assistance, retention incentives, child care stipends, and other related expenses. Our full report provides supports for several key elements of this bill. A preference for at least a partially trained person in meat processing, so training at the technical colleges is important. Employee retention incentives was highly ranked. Apprenticeship as a path for learning meat processing received a response of 60% of the people interviewed very interested. Business management would be a good for an apprentice to learn from technical colleges. While not provided for in the bill, healthcare was weighted heavily as a key item of importance for employee retention for workers in small meat processing. I also want to say our result came from a result of, the 50 plus interviews with individual meat processors. I believe when you look at the problem or the issue, that's always going to the source of people who are engaged in the work. Finally, I want to also, again, lift up the importance of cultural navigation this bill provides under Subdivision 2 as to grants. MDA needs partner organizations to effectively reach communities which have historically been underrepresented in local meat processing, especially in management and ownership. Minnesota Farmers Bottleneck Project has focused on to open doors and to navigate barriers for these communities. We entered into partnership with the Latino Economic Development Center, LEDC, to recruit, train, and support members of the Latino community to become owners of local meat processing businesses in ownership transition. We are working with an Afghan community member employed by DEED who is serving as a navigator for his community, who seeks to raise livestock, own and operate halal butcher shop, and retail and wholesale the meat to serve their community interest in fresh, local halal meats. Such organizations such as LEDCs, Afghan community organizations, and others are vital cultural competent partners of MDA who seek to own and operate local butcher businesses. Grants to such organizations to train and support their workforce, as well as support their vital assistance in navigating the unique hurdles that these communities face, while living and working in Minnesota will be vital to their success and to meeting our shared goals of a strong and local food system. Examples of non-GO and local government agency partners who could apply for and receive grants under this could be like LEDC, could be like the Hmong American Farmers Association, Somali American Farmers Association, our project, for example, as well as regional economic development centers and small business development centers and more. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of 2681.
Thank you, Mr. Sobocinski. Members, do we have questions or comments? Senator Dornick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple questions to the well, whoever wants to take it, but Senator Kunesh. So the training for this, what's the length of the course and how much is the tuition for a standard meat cutting course?
Senator Kunesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I don't know what that is. I'm wondering if any of our testifiers could share some of that information. Maybe if Sophia Toms is still on, she would be able to give us some ideas of the programming.
Ms. Thomas, you got an idea for us?
Yes, I do. And so at Ridgewater College, and I know at CLC as well, for the beginning meat cutting certificate program, it's just a 1 semester in length, so about 16 weeks. Although we'll be offering other advanced certificates as well, but for a 1 semester 18 credit certificate, that the student or employee will gather the basic knowledge of knife skills, carcass breakdowns, things like that, is just short of $4,000. So that's the cost at Ridgewater, and I know it's very similar at CLC as well.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Senator Dornick?
Follow. Thank you, Ms. Thomas. And then another question is, I see you got 150. How many processors at that size are there in Minnesota? Do we have an approximate, maybe not exact, but kind of an estimate of how many that includes?
Ms. Thomas, do you think you can help us with that one too? Or any other testifiers? It looks like our friends at they're debating right now. It's kind of fun to watch.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Can you just repeat the question one more time?
Sorry, Ms. Thomas, I think that we've got a ringer here who can handle this one for us, if you could, please. Again, if you wouldn't mind, state your full name for the record and then provide any wisdom that you could, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Dr. Nicole Neeser. I'm the Director of the Dairy and Meat Inspection Division at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And I believe the question was number of processors below 150. Is that right?
Senator Dornick?
Sure. So the at MDA, we license and permit the custom exempt processors at Minnesota Equal 2 processors, and all of those are under 150, and that is about 350. And I would say there's probably another less than 50 USDA processors. So I would say about 350 to 400 processors in that range.
Senator Dornick?
Follow up. Thank you. So let's say the benefits, I want to make sure that these wouldn't be taxable. So it's part of it's for tuition up to $10,000. Are we sure that none of these would be taxable on reimbursement?
Senator Kunesh?
Gosh, that's another really good question. I don't know about that. Anybody here have, any of our experts have an idea? So as a question, is this considered income and therefore would be taxable?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Make sure that we're not having a tax on our students. Yeah, that's the question.
Thank you, Senator Dornick. Mr. Laurie, if you would please state your full name for the record and commence your testimony.
Chair Putnam, Stu Laurie. I am the Government Relations Director for Minnesota Farmers Union, and I am not the expert, but I just consulted them, and they assured me that all their grants are taxable. It would have to be taxable.
Thank you, Mr. Laurie. Senator Dornick?
So there would be tax consequences to whoever got the grant then. All right, just so they know that and when they get it. So, all right, thank you.
Members, any other questions or comments? Senator Kunesh, your closing comments, please.
Thank you, committee, so much. I want to thank you for this opportunity to present this bill. I think when we are talking about the workforce and bringing in younger workers. We also have to remember that this workforce is also an aging workforce group, and trying to replace it is going to be very, very important. I think I've shared with you in the past, I have a daughter that's a butcher herself, and she is always looking for somebody. She runs the meat department for one of the local co-ops, and she is always looking and doing on-the-job training. So if there were opportunities such as this, I think that would make her job a lot easier. This could certainly be a key program for helping to ensure that these brick and mortar businesses across our state continue into the next generation. And so I'm proud to carry this bill, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, Senator Kunesh. Senate File 2681 as amended will be held over for possible inclusion. Next bill is also Senator Kunesh, Senate File 2557, certain provisions prohibition in carbon storage contracts. Senator Kunesh, when you're ready.
Thanks again, Chair Putnam. So this bill is really simple, and it's about ensuring fairness for farmers. It will prevent carbon market contracts from including confidentiality clauses that would limit farmers' ability to show that contract to others. This mirrors long-standing law barring confidentiality clauses in egg production contracts. This proposal comes out of the work completed by Minnesota Farmers Union, Farmers Legal Action Group, and the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to create a farmer's guide to carbon market contracts. To note for background, carbon market contracts are legally binding agreements that farmers enter into with big companies. The agreement allows companies to sell credit for carbon that farmers sequester through implementing certain farming practices like no-till or cover crops. The market is developing quickly, and it has been fairly described as the Wild West. In order to help our members ensure that they're getting a fair deal, MFU partnered with MDA to collect carbon market contracts that the attorney at FLAG then reviewed. FLAG found that most of these contracts included confidentiality clauses requiring that the farmer keep the terms of the agreement secret. We do not feel that this is good practice, and if the industry is going to develop in a way that is fair and helps farmers meet their on-farm conservation goals, it's important that farmers be able to share their contracts freely, be that with their neighbor, MDA, or anyone else. And with that, Mr. Chair, I am happy to turn it over to our testifiers.
Thank you, Senator Kunesh. Our testifier is online. It's Mr. Schwagrel. If you would please state your full name for the record and commence your testimony when you're ready.
Sure. Chair Putnam, members, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senator Kunesh's bill, Senate File 2557, here this afternoon. For the record, my name is Peter Schwagel, and I, along with my wife Ann, own and operate Prairie Point Farm in Big Stone County. We primarily raise crops, including corn, soybeans, oats, and kernza. Over the last several years, I've become increasingly aware of the opportunity to add carbon sequestration as an additional commodity and revenue stream to that list. This seems appealing as it would give us a financial boost to implement new and more efficient farming practices such as no-till and cover crops. However, as I began to explore the carbon market opportunity, I quickly realized why it is often referred to as the Wild West. There are lots of companies and intermediaries involved in this arena, each with their own payment rates, contract provisions, and requirements. It was a lot for an individual farmer to wade through, and was hard to determine just what constituted a fair deal. Unfortunately, I was not the only family farmer in the state wrestling to understand the intricacies of carbon contracts. Recognizing the need for further education about carbon contracts, Minnesota Farmers Union, Farmers Legal Action Group, and the Minnesota Department of Agriculture came together to create the Farmer's Guide to Carbon Market Contracts in Minnesota. I have the privilege of having served on the Farmer Advisory Committee for this publication and believe it is a treasure trove of information on the topic. One of the key findings, as was said in this guide, is that many of the carbon contracts that were evaluated
included confidentiality clauses requiring farmers to keep the terms of the agreement secret. This is a glaring problem for myself and many other farmers who are trying to make educated decisions about these new carbon markets. It's often said that farmers learn best by talking to other farmers. I know I certainly find that to be the case. Whether it is learning about new farming practices, what new corn varieties I should be trying, or finding reliable grain buyers or input suppliers, I talk to other farmers. By including confidentiality clauses in their agreements, these companies are preventing farmers from one of our key sources of information, each other. I feel that it is important for farmers to be able to share information with each other and our trusted farm organizations so that we can weed out the bad players and push each other towards the companies who are offering fair prices and terms for our conservation efforts. Passing this bill would bring transparency to the wild west of carbon markets and help farmers across the state make educated decisions about which carbon market partners we want to do business with, if any. I appreciate your consideration today. Thanks, Senator Kunesh, for your leadership on this bill, and would be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schweigel. Members, questions and comments on Senate File 2557? Senator Dames.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if Senator Kunesh, I'm not sure that you can answer this, and I would understand. Do you know, is there regulations now when it comes to, say, green energy with the windmills or with the solar systems? Is there verbiage in those contracts? I think there's verbiage in those contracts that allow for them to ask for secrecy. If that's correct, would you consider putting an amendment on your bill here to eliminate it there too?
Senator Kunesh.
Something to think about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator. That is a really good thing to think about. I personally, and maybe others can agree with me, these confidentiality clauses are really not doing a service to the farmers or to really anyone in the fair market area. And so I would ask if any of our experts know the answer to that, if there are confidentiality clauses in those contracts for windmills and solar energy.
Mr. Laurie, if you would mind stating your full name for the record again and helping us out.
Thank you, Chair Putnam and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Stu Laurie, Government Relations Director for Minnesota Farmers Union. Thank you for the question. I'll start for the record. Farmers Union would support barring all confidentiality contracts for the reasons that Senator Kunesh described. In discussing this bill with Senator Kunesh and drafting it, we opted to focus on the parallel contracts to what's already in MDA statutes. So I think those requirements on those type of contracts would be in other committees' jurisdictions, and so we opted to keep this simple. But would love to work with you both next session or even this session on a broader proposal because we think it's fair. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Laurie. Senator Dames?
No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Members, any other questions or comments? Senator Kunesh, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank all of you again and appreciate the good questions that we have here. This bill is really important because we want to make sure that the marketplace is fair and accountable to the farmers, and in almost everything, transparency is really so important. So thank you much.
Thank you, Senator Kunesh. Senate File 2557 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Members, we've done an incredibly good job. Proud of us to be as efficient as we have been to this point in our session today. Just as note, our next 7 bills, these are all bills, these are policy bills we were given by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Each of these bills that we're going to go through now is something that they've asked us to do to kind of clarify this or clarify that or change this or change that. That's the remainder of our bills today. And with that being said, I'm up first.
Okay, Senator Putnam has Senate File 2379. You go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, as I mentioned earlier, is a Minnesota Department of Agriculture policy change. This is about dairy industry regulation and provisions. It's a technical change that moves some of the regulatory authorities for responding to dairy-related adulteration or misbranding events to Chapter 34A instead of Chapter 17. Currently, only some parts of the current dairy Chapter 32D are directly covered by 34A, mostly plants and haulers. Chapter 34A was created several years ago to provide a consistent and clear enforcement authority for the oversight of food safety. At the time, some parts of dairy were included, but others remained under Chapter 17. Chapter 17 is an older enforcement approach and does not provide as clear of means to address contaminated dairy food incidents. This creates confusion and a patchwork of regulations to navigate. This change does not impact the authorities or enforcement approach normally used for permitted dairy farms and plants, as all of that is still done under the PMO and Dairy Chapter 32D. It gives MDA a more clear authority for responding to other dairy food contamination-related incidents, especially in a situation when a farm or plant was not permitted or licensed. That's this bill.
Any discussion? Seeing none, we will, any closing thoughts?
I have so many, but I'll spare us and let us move on.
Okay, with that, Senate File 2379 is held over. On to Senate File 2128, Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, again, is a Minnesota Department of Agricultural policy bill about restricted species provisions modifications. And I should note, as I discussed this very briefly, that we do have a friend from the DNR here to testify on this issue as well, as both MDA and DNR do support this initiative. MDA's statutory authorities for regulating farmed restricted species, Eurasian wild pigs and their hybrids, are outdated and based on industry conditions in the mid-1990s. There are currently no farms in operation that have an active permit for restricted species. The only entity that has active restricted species permit is the Minnesota Zoo. This simply clarifies that language.
Okay, and I understand there is somebody from the DNR who would like to make a few comments. Thank you. Please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Mr. Chair, thank you. My name is Pat Rivers, Deputy Director for the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and I'd like to thank the author and the committee for working with the DNR on this bill. We support Senate File 2128 and look forward to further revisions, possibly in another session. But thank you, and we support 2128.
Members, any comments, questions, discussions? Seeing none, any final thoughts? Do you have a lot on this one too, Senator Putnam?
I do, Senator, Mr. Chair, but I think I'll leave you in mystery. You just have to wonder what I'm thinking on this.
Sometimes that is better. And with that, then, Senate File 2128 is held over. On to Senate File 2315.
Members, this is when it really gets exciting. Now we're talking about non-native phragmites. Extra credit to anyone who knew what that was before today. This is another agency bill where we're talking about non-native phragmites addition to the noxious weeds provisions. Non-native phragmites is an invasive plant that was recently added to the state noxious weed list as prohibited noxious weed in Minnesota. It's similar to purple loosestrife, also a prohibited noxious weed, in that it is semi-aquatic and can grow above and below the normal high water mark that separates terrestrial and aquatic enforcement authorities under state law. Controlling plants in aquatic environments has special considerations beyond controlling plants in terrestrial environments, and there's a subdivision in the noxious weed law, Minnesota State Chapter 18, which lays out special considerations for control of purple loosestrife. This technical change adds non-native phragmites to the subdivision so that it is given the same considerations for management enforcement as purple loosestrife.
Any questions, comments? Yes, Senator Dames.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Putnam, can you tell me why non-native phragmites and the purple loosestrife is being treated differently from other noxious weeds?
Senator Putnam.
I cannot, actually. I'm assuming it has something to do with the aquatic versus terrestrial variable, but I think we'll have to ask someone from MDA to give us a little bit more insight into that.
Okay, please state your name for the record, and then you can answer the question.
Mr. Chair, I'm Anthony Cordelette. I oversee the noxious weed program for the Department of Agriculture. I actually thought that was going to be one of your thoughts to be able to answer this question, Senator Putnam, but it's a great question. It's a little confusing, Senator Doms, because there is a difference between aquatic and terrestrial enforcement. DNR oversees all the aquatic parts of that. Department of Ag has the noxious weed law that oversees the terrestrial part of that. With these species like purple loosestrife and non-native Phragmites, they grow in both habitats. And so Chapter 18, Section 78 addresses that issue because under the high water mark, there's other restrictions that people have to do to manage aquatic species, like get permits from the DNR and so forth.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Sure, Senator Dames.
And could you tell me how many different species are there of non-native Phragmites?
Mr. Chair, Senator Doms, there is a native species of Phragmites, and then there is just the non-native species of Phragmites, so that would be the only one.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none. Senator Putnam, any closing thoughts on this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. It's about time that we took a stand against the non-native Phragmites, and this is our opportunity to do so. I'm not, this is a political statement too, I'm not afraid to stand up to big Phragmites.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Dames.
Just to follow up, Senator Putnam, have you ever seen a non-native Phragmite? Do you know what you're standing up against? Just curious.
Right, and with that, then we have successfully passed yet another weed bill out of agriculture. Laid over, sorry. We're not passing that up. Okay, we are on to Senate File 2625.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate File 2625 is about minimum risk pesticide definition establishment, minimum risk pesticide use for growing medical cannabis authorization. The Environmental Protection Agency has determined that certain ingredients allowed as active and inert ingredients in minimum risk pesticides pose little to no risk to human health or the environment. The MDA does not register minimum risk pesticides, but the department does regulate these pesticides to ensure that all conditions of minimum risk exemptions are met, and the use is according to label directions. Due to cannabis being classified as a Schedule I substance under federal law, there are no U.S. EPA registered pesticide products approved for use on cannabis, thus this bill.
Members, any questions? Senator Daines.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to compliment you on your comment about another weed bill right before the cannabis bill. I think you were thinking ahead of us.
Foreshadowing. Any, Senator Kunesh.
I do have a question. So I know that cannabis is classified as Schedule I under federal law, but there are states that for where cannabis and recreational cannabis and other medical cannabis is legalized. And so I'm wondering, because it's been illegal, and so we haven't been able to do a lot of research on perhaps some of these pesticides. Are there pesticides that other states have approved that would be possible to bring into the world of medical cannabis? Should it be sold here in Minnesota or grown here in Minnesota?
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Kunesh, for that question. I don't know exactly what other states do, but I do have a little piece of information here about hemp, because the EPA classifies hemp as a crop, and more than 90 pesticides are registered for use on hemp. So it sounds like there are things happening in other states and other places that are just complicated by federal law.
And it looks like you have a friend next to you to help answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Yes, the other states do have pesticides. Those are allowed on medical cannabis, and those are mostly the 25B, the minimum risk pesticides we're talking about. Their statutes allow those minimum risk pesticides on the use for medical cannabis. For the record, my name is Raj Man, and I'm a pesticide manager at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Kunesh?
Just a quick comment. So then we don't have to start from like ground zero. There are already known and established pesticides that could possibly use should cannabis like that come to Minnesota. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, with that, any closing thoughts on this one? No, that's fine.
I think we're good, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and with that, Senate File 2625 is also laid over.
Members, our next order of business is Senate File 2550, Senator Seeberger, Nursery and Plant Protection Provisions Modification. Senator Seeberger, if you would, please. Commence your testimony, and when you're ready, and introduce your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm before you here today on Senate File 2550. The MDA is responsible for the nursery law, which is found in Minnesota Statutes Chapter 18H, with the purpose of preventing the introduction into and the dissemination within Minnesota of harmful plant pests. Nursery stock must be inspected and certified free of harmful plant pests prior to sale. The MDA nursery program has reviewed Chapter 18H with our nursery advisor group and has a number of technical updates to propose to the chapter. For the most part, these updates do not significantly change the way the program operates. One exception is nursery stock sales by municipalities and not-for-profits, some of which are currently exempt from a certificate under special circumstances. Under this proposal, these entities would need a certificate, but fees for the certificate would be waived. Minnesota Statutes Chapter 18G, Plant Protection and Export Certification, has terms and definitions that overlap with 18H, and we have updated the language in 18G to match or coordinate it with 18H as appropriate.
Thank you, Senator Seeberger. Members, questions, comments? Seeing none, Senator Seeberger, your closing comments.
I have none, thank you.
Senate File 2550 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Senator Seeberger, Senate File 2551, Genetically Engineered Organisms Provisions Modification. To the bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I have before you Senate File 2551. Minnesota Statutes 18F, which is the Genetically Engineered Organisms, or GEOs, provision, was drafted in 1991 and has not had significant edits since 1994. At the time the statute was created, federal programs for oversight of GEOs were not yet very well developed. However, since that time, the USDA has established a branch, the Biotechnology Regulatory Service, or BRS, which has the responsibility for reviewing and establishing conditions for the movement and release of GEOs with plant pest potential. Biotechnology Regulatory Services provide a robust scientific review process with ample opportunity for state participation. 18F, as written in the 1990s, is duplicative to the current federal review process. We propose updating 18F to recognize the state's role in participating in the federal review process rather than requiring a separate state review process. This proposal brings Minnesota into alignment with the federal process that works well, and Minnesota is currently the only state in the U.S. with a statute requiring state review of GEO movement and release.
Thank you, Senator Seeberger. Members, questions, comments?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Dames.
Senator Seeberger, could you tell me how many people are currently appealing between the 21st and the 45th day? Because you're taking it from 45 to 20, is that correct?
Senator Seeberger.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dames, I'm wondering if the MDA might have some information on that question.
My name is Denise Theed, and I'm the section manager for the seed, noxious weed, and hemp and biotechnology programs at MDA. And I think your question is in reference to a different bill.
Yeah, I believe that is correct. I think, Senator Dames, your question is about Senate File 266.
You're right.
Do you want to
I apologize.
hold your question?
I apologize. We'll get it later. Yep.
Spoiler alert.
Yep. Yes. I just wanted to give you a warning it was coming.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions to Senator Seeberger? Closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator James, I really thought that was a trick question. I'm glad it wasn't. Thank you very much for considering this bill.
Senate File 2551 will be laid over for possible conclusion. Senator Kupec, Senate File 2666, appeal period modification from 20 days after service of an order for the Pesticide Fertilizer Management Division or Plant Protection Division of the Department of Agriculture. Senator Kupec, to your bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Spoiler alert, this is Senate File 2666, which is going to appeal the modification days to 20 days after service of an order from Pesticide and Fertilizer Management Division or Plant Protection. Currently, when there's an order related to the pesticide or fertilizer, the receiver has 45 days to appeal. The 45-day appeal was established when it was primarily done through written communication or the postal service, and now it's faster. So the proposed change reduces the appeal period to 20 days in both 18D and 18J, and this aligns with other enforcement statutes used by the MDA.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. Members, any questions? Senator James.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to repeat the question? Do you know how many people are appealing between the 21st and 45th day?
So I don't have an answer on the number of people appealing, but this change would make it consistent within the whole department to have a 20-day appeal period. So right now in some divisions, it's 20 days. And in pesticide and fertilizer and plant protection, it's 45. So this change would make it consistent. In my experience in the seed program, we have some people wait to take action for that full 45-day period, which does delay the time to get to a resolution. So shortening the time frame, allows for faster resolution on issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up, do you have any idea how many appeals you have in a year in this area?
I do not.
Is there somebody from your department that would be here that would have an idea? No. Okay. Thank you. That's all right.
We can find out.
If you could look it up, I'd
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Members, any other questions or comments? Senator Kupec, close the statement.
I have none, Mr. Chair.
Senate File 2666 will be laid over for possible conclusion. Our last bill of the evening, Senate File 2667, Advanced Biofuel Production Incentive and Renewable Chemical Production Incentive Provisions Modification. Senator Kupec, to your bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This proposal involves a technical correction to the Advanced Biofuel Production Incentive, Renewable Chemical Production Incentive, and Biomass Thermal Production Incentives. These technical corrections align with language added during the 2022 legislative session with current statutory definitions and fix technical corrections that were made in the 2019 session that were inadvertently undone in 2022. Technical change proposed will allow MDA to administer the incentive program more efficiently and effectively by eliminating conflicting language currently in statute.
Thank you, Senator Kupec. Members, any questions or comments? Senator James.
So is this going to make quite a bit of change in the minimum amount of advanced biofuels or renewable chemicals needed for a facility to receive an incentive payment?
Senator Kupec.
I will ask MDA if they have somebody who...
Deputy Commissioner Vauble, if you would, please. Again, if you please state your full name for the record and then help us out with your wisdom, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Andrea Vobble. I serve as Deputy Commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. To your question, Senator Dames, so in 2019, the technical corrections that were made for the minimum production required to enter the program, so it was advocated for the Bioeconomy Coalition, who brought the whole program to us in the beginning, and then general industry to allow smaller businesses to be eligible for the production incentive. So this just reverts this back to the pre-2019 level before things were changed. So we want to make sure that it is open to smaller producers who are trying to, at pilot scale, grow into commercial scale.
Thank you, Mr. Vobble. Senator Dames?
Mr. Chair, thank you. So is this tied into the grant program?
Deputy Commissioner Vobble?
Mr. Chair, Senator Dames, this is separate from the grant program. This is just for the production incentive program.
Thank you.
Senator Dames?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Members, any other questions or comments? Senator Kupec, your closing comments.
Closing comments for the last bill of the afternoon. Well, if you're not first, you're last, so thank you.
Senate File 2667 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Members, that's the conclusion of our work for today. I'm exceedingly proud of us for being as efficient as we were. Coming up on Wednesday. No, that's from last week. Okay. Coming up on Wednesday, we will start with final discussion of the Women Venture appropriation that we heard of last week. Then we will have a presentation of Senate File 2763, which is the dairy program with an I. Then Senator Kupec will tell us about Second Harvest Heartland grant appropriation and also farming incubator project appropriations. And then Senator Kunesh will talk to us about Senate File 2556, technical assistant grants appropriation for certain community development financial institutions. And then Senator Kunesh will also tell us a little bit about a funding increase for the Agriculture Research, Education, Extension, and Technology Transfer Grant Program and the Farm Business Management Challenge Grants. So that's what we're doing on Wednesday. Hope to see you then. There being no further business for the committee, we are adjourned.